Good evening. I'd invite you to join us in the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Start with the roll call. Mason?
Mrs. Fryrick?
Here.
Now is absent. Mr. Robinson?
Here.
Mr. Sanders?
Here.
Mr. Scolette?
Here.
Mrs. Schrader?
Here.
Mr. Sears?
Here.
Mr. Toman?
Here.
Mr. Watts?
Here.
A reminder, please, to silence your cell phones during our meeting. All comments and questions will be addressed to the President. Board and staff members will not normally respond to comments or questions during the meeting unless recognized by the President for this purpose. Comments will be limited at the discretion of the President to 5 minutes or less. Are there any public comments at this time? Seeing none, we'll move on. We need to act on the minutes of the regular meeting of December 17th and the Planning Committee meeting of January 7th. Are there any corrections or comments regarding the minutes? If not, then we can approve those as they were submitted. Mr. Sears, the Treasurer's report.
This is a consent agenda. Would any board member like any of the items considered separately? Or are there any questions on any of the items? If not, the chair moves approval of the below mentioned items.
Second.
Discussion? I'll give you my monthly interest report. Interest for December was $183,154, which is a pretty nice chunk of change considering the interest rate climate.
Okay.
Will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Moving on to the Board President's report, Mr. Posnow sends his regrets, by the way. The Board met prior to this meeting in executive session as permitted by Section 707 of the Sunshine Act for the purpose of discussing personnel matters. No official action was taken. I'd also like to remind everyone about the program, the community program tomorrow evening. So you want to be a school board member. We could set you on your path toward doing that or not doing that if you're interested. Tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock over at the high school. In all seriousness, we hope that we've gotten a little bit of publicity in the paper and all, that hopefully we can have some interest. We've done this the last several years. We've had an election and oh yeah, I could read that. We have a number of speakers sitting on the panel. We have Mr. Carl from West York, Mr. Lytle from Dallastown, Steve Scolette, our very own, will sit on the panel, Mr. Wolfgang from Central, and Dr. Williams will also be helping us out. So if there is any interest or you might spread the word, we'd like to have a nice turnout for that. Also to remind the board of our strategic planning retreat, which is scheduled for the 11th of February, beginning at 6 p.m. Any comments or thanks to the Communications Committee? I guess that wasn't that when you were Communications, Rich, for organizing the school?
It was a group effort by the whole committee.
There you go. We like that. Dr. Williams, Superintendent's report.
Thank you. January is School Board Recognition Month. The school board members serve the communities on a completely voluntary basis in supporting and providing a free and appropriate public education to the students of Pennsylvania. I've often talked to people who thought board members were paid. They're not. And if I could double your salary, I would.
Supposed to say that until after tomorrow's meeting.
Right. But on this board before you, you have a grand total of 51 years of experience as board members. The real veteran here
That was well put, thank you.
is Ellen, with 21 years of service to the board, followed by Lois Ann with 11, and then Mr. Posnow and Mr. Sears each have 5, and Mr. Toman has 3. So when you think about the 51 years of service on the board, that's with 3 people newly elected on this board. There's 3 people on the board who have 1 year of experience. So when you figure that there's 51 years of experience and 3 people have 1 year of experience on the board, that's pretty significant. That bodes well for the institution. So in front of you is a token of our appreciation for the work you do for our students.
Yay.
Use it in good health, especially on a cold day like today.
Absolutely.
It'll be very helpful. So thank you, folks, for your service. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, the next report is from Miranda King, our social worker, and she will share with us her experiences so far. She's been with us since the summer, and I know firsthand that she's very busy, and she'll share with you what keeps her so busy.
Yeah, so good evening. Thank you for letting me take a little bit of your time tonight. I just want to give you a quick update on what I've been up to the last 5.5 months, but also kind of the direction we're looking to go to help the district, the community, and of course students and families. So I just wanted you to take a couple minutes to watch this quick video on, make an impact, and that's what I'm trying to do here, and I hope that all of you will continue to do the same.
What's up? Just got done running.
It's not that.
I
You
know,
can skip that in a second. You
Amazing
can
stream, surrounded by.
Right up there is the happy bad. Yep.
When we're laying on our deathbed, you're not going to worry about how much money you had, how much power you had, how much prestige. You're going to see that that was all a game, that was all an illusion. The only thing that's going to matter is the impact you had on other people's lives.
We are all on a separate journey. But the beautiful thing about our life here on this earth is at my funeral, they ain't gonna talk about my success. They're gonna talk about who Nick was, and how Nick lived, and how Nick loved and encouraged.
Success is incredibly important, but even more important than success, it's having an impact. It's knowing you haven't walked the planet in vain. It's knowing that because you've been here, you've blessed lives, you've developed people, and you have made the world a better place.
The effect you have on others is the most valuable currency there is. Everything you gain in life will rot and fall apart, and all that will be left of you is what was in your heart.
Life is a mirror, and life gives us not what we want. Life gives us who we are. When you were born, you cried while the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way that when you die, the world cries while you rejoice.
You can go back to that. So the goal here is to kind of carry that, an impact to students, to recognize that yes, they're learning in academics, but really who they are and what they carry with them, and how can we support to make that happen. So What impact at York Suburban does social work community involvement have? I've been tracking cases that are referred to me on a social work referral tracker. If you want to go ahead and click on that. I don't have to go through it in detail, but any referral that I receive, I get from any of the counselors across all buildings. So on the bottom, I keep track by school. High school and middle school is combined. That way, they wanted to be able to sort of track if we receive an 8th grader, are we using that family, year to year to year. Home visits, school visits, I do the best that I can to encapsulate how often I see them. But it's more important to actually do the work than always be collecting a bunch of numbers. And then I tally different referrals that are made, anything from the county assistance office, a mental health referral, food referrals. And then I also try to encapsulate the household, because even though I get a referral for one identified student, there might be 4 other students inside of the home, younger, out of school age, or older, college level, and I work with the family as a unit. Go back to the presentation. So then I broke it down again, referrals by school, but again, that's as current as I could be, and then the percentages of the top referrals that I receive. Predominantly, they're mental health services. We have a kid that's actively suicidal, or a teacher or counselor identifies they're high anxiety, they're depressed, so we're getting them connected to supports in the community. The second is homelessness, believe it or not. I took over being the homelessness liaison and had to completely restructure to pass the audit that we just had in November. I believe we did quite well, but I'm the new liaison, so any homeless family that we identify, I typically go to the home or the shelter or wherever they're doubled up with a box from the impact closet to kind of make them feel welcome and start immediately to get them the supports that they need. And then again, the impact closet is also a really high referral. Home visits, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, really as needed with the families. Some of our parents are transient. We can't get them to return paperwork or get their kids the supports that they need, so I'm going in-home, advocating and empowering them to do what needs to be done. Again, some additional stuff. This is all feedback from our K-12 guidance meeting that we had on what's been helpful, not helpful, areas of growth. I actually put together a community resource guide my first couple weeks here, and I released that to all of administration and the counselors. That way, if I'm unavailable, they have a list of case management, children's services, homeless services, therapy, med management, furniture, you name it, it's all on there that they can kind of use at their disposal if I'm not immediately available. Building rapport with families, habitual attendance issues. Again, I'm going to the house in the morning, or sometimes picking the kids up, like you're going to school, let's figure out why you're habitually absent, and again, start to empower why they need to be in school. Like I said, take a look at the list. Unaccompanied youth, I actually restructured, we'll get to that in a second, our student residency form to really try to encapsulate kids that are living with grandparents because mom and dad might be in jail, because they are identified as unaccompanied and are eligible for additional services. Why is that important? When they get to high school, 12th grade, they get a lot of extra grants and funding for college that they may not be aware of, and it can really support them to have a bright future. So I'm really trying to get those kids that we might miss to self-identify and be comfortable to say, hey, my living situation is not good. What can you do to help out? You can go to the next slide. Again, some other things that we're trying to do is some mental health initiatives. I did a mini staff training for all of when I first came on board to at their faculty meetings. I'm starting with the middle school to have a pretty collaborative in-service coming up in February. If it's successful, then I'd like to replicate across all of the buildings. It's on trauma, vicarious trauma, and trauma-focused classrooms. I held a parent clinic with another social worker from another district, and I got a lot of awesome feedback. We had 15 parents come, which is great, and we could have had 0. I'd like to do another one, but the holidays are a little crazy, so hopefully we can plan for one of those in February. I also screened the 7th graders. If you can click on the one that says ACEs data, yep. We did the adverse childhood experience, and then if you scroll all the way to the bottom, this is just 7th grade. We kind of broke it down, but I wanted you to take a look. Keep going. On the grand total, so this is a 10-question questionnaire. We eliminated one question, so we actually surveyed 9. And if you look at the percentages, 39% of just 7th graders have a parent that's been separated or divorced. 15% feel like their parents don't love them. And then another one, 13% that their parents have been incarcerated, which again, I don't think we always think of those numbers to be as significant as they are. And that's just one small grade level, total of 242 students that we surveyed. And then with that data, we've implemented some videos on Schoology about anxiety. We have Mr. Showbaker, our resiliency captain, so he does videos. We have a cape for him and a shirt to get the kids empowered to be resilient and gain some skills to recognize that it's okay to not be okay and how we can help them to improve. Again, the Student Residency Forum, we updated again to get kids a little bit more comfortable to identify their homelessness status. I joined the Safe to Stay, the TIP team, comprehensive planning, really trying to be involved in as much as possible to take what I'm hearing from students and faculty to help district-wide. So I wanted you to just take a minute before I give you the information about a case. So who is high risk here? So if you want to read Family A and Family B, and then if it's okay, I'd just like to take a quick hand raise poll. If you were going to intervene, which is the more likely family that you would want to provide a service to immediately?
A, immediately. That's the one that
So A, who would
fits the
say A?
stereotype.
Okay, and these are actual case examples within our school district. Obviously, I took out all identifiers, so if you can go ahead and click the next two, and then again. So I put prior to social work interventions and then currently their situation. So for me, the high risk was Family B because we did not identify because of the affluent in the community, family support. There was a lot of stigma associated to the mental health, and that was an actively suicidal student, self-harm, but didn't feel like they had a safe space to talk about how they were feeling. So that's why we, for what I'm doing, I'm trying to impact across the board that there is no stigma, regardless of their socioeconomic status. They're all receiving the same sort of supports and interventions to have that safe space to talk about how they feel. So both of them have had pretty positive outcomes connected to treatment, and then also building a rapport with the family to be more involved, provide us with a simple, accurate phone number so we're not chasing papers down, and they've all been academically tested and are receiving IEPs and emotional support, which otherwise we would not have been able to do. So yeah, I know that was pretty quick, but that's a little snippet of kind of what I'm doing. So any questions?
Questions?
When you identify a student or a family situation that requires outside services, particularly behavioral health services, are you running into any obstacles, or is there a pattern that you see where there could be improvement?
Yes, and some of the administrators have actually tug along with me on some of those situations. So it's really a double-edged sword. There is no platform of how mental illness is sort of evaluated, if you will. I've been to crisis with one student that I was like, oh my gosh, we had a police escort, they're going to admit. They didn't admit. So then I've been with another student who had, baseline issues, and they would admit. So it's really hard to kind of say, what they specifically will take or intervene. What I've tried to do is build collaborations with some of the providers in the community and some of the group homes that we have, where we get a lot of our kids that are really struggling with significant trauma, and kind of put my name out there, my face out there, but also reduce the stigma with parents, that it's okay that your child's depressed. We can get them help, but there is no standard. Every agency is a little bit different. There's a lot of wait lists for med management, so I'm a little bit aggressively assertive, so I'll call and call and call until we get them in, or really beef up the referral so we can at least get that intake in the door. I've transported families and students when they can't make the intake, or if mom or dad's working, or make sure they're available by phone. Trying to get kids to consent to their own treatment, because we do have parents who won't allow them. So it's a little bit of everything.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I have two questions. One is, one of your activities you wrote is rapport with elusive parents, and I'm wondering if you can give an example that you've encountered the sense that's been elusive and what you've done in response and how there's been success. That's one question. The other question is, have you visited any classrooms? And that's a leading question to how do information flows work? So does it start from classroom to teacher to guidance counselor to you? Or if you could just explain a little bit about that process.
Sure. So elusive parents, I'll start by a typical phone call, email, whatever number I have, and then I'm going out to the home, knocking. I usually try to bribe some of the families with shampoo, toilet paper, food, coffee. I'll occasionally take coffee to kind of break the ice, especially if it's a vulnerable conversation. If they don't answer, I keep going. I've got my business card. I'll put fun colors on it or stickers, and stick it in the door that I'm not here to take your children. I'm not here to make it more difficult for you. I'm a supportive piece, an extra measure. And kind of once you build that rapport, then after that it's much easier. Sometimes I'll take an application for benefits that they're eligible for, which sometimes seems to work if they don't recognize they can have a lower electric bill or a lower gas bill. I really try to market the services out there as a way for me to get in the home. I also meet them where they're at. I don't stigmatize the condition of the home, the odors coming out of the home. Obviously, if they're child unreportable, we've made those reports, but I really try to meet our families wherever they're at and reduce that stigma just to support whatever they need. As far as referrals, so typically we have teachers that have already identified a lot of the students. They'll go to the counselor or administration, they'll kind of collaborate, or sometimes they'll even call me on a collaborative call. And usually when they reach a level where they've tried behavioral interventions, we've tried aids, we've tried almost, giving them candy, incentives, and it's just not working, they need a higher level of intervention. It's typically when it comes to me, or if the parent is directly impeding their academic success by not completing a signature to be evaluated, that's where I step in and can go to the home and again bridge that gap. So that's kind of how the turnover happens. They have access to the referral tracker so they can kind of see what we're working on, but then I also try to be super diligent about whoever referred me, the teacher, the administrator, and the counselor is getting an email follow-up. Hey, here's what we're working on, or, Johnny is going through severe depression. If he's, overreactionary tomorrow at recess, here's why. Or there's been a death in the family, or a dad lost his job, or they're recently homeless. I really try to keep that communication line open. Sure.
First, a comment. I appreciate your presentation. When this position was created, I wasn't quite sure what this was going to look like, and what you're down the path of is helping me to understand that. So, I thank you for that.
Sure.
I guess two questions. When you create these plans of action for the kids in need, help me understand your thought process on how you define a success, and where it goes when you feel like you've done what you can do. And then secondly, clearly there's a vast-ranging need here. In your 5.5 months, what is the greatest need that you find that we are missing?
The greatest need is that mental health piece. I think allowing students to be a person as opposed to an academic kind of robot, if you will. The environments in each of the buildings are significantly different. So again, it's part of normalizing that it's okay to not be okay and to ask for that help. And how can we support you to kind of improve. Trends are changing, culture is changing, accountability of students is changing, and even accountability, I think, of parents. So it's kind of getting that understanding and buy-in how important mental health is, and just because you're depressed or you're identified with anxiety, there is no stigma associated to that. You can be highly successful and functional and have your dream job, and maybe you don't want to go to an Ivy League school, maybe you want to be a welder or a plumber, and that's absolutely okay. I think it's identifying the students with where they want to go and how do we support for them to be successful and get there. On your first question, success for me is if I have one student that comes up to me and says, hey, Ms. King, thanks for taking 5 minutes to sit down with me and have lunch because I would have went home and self-harmed myself or thought about not coming to school the next day. That is super important, that one person, even if I affect change with one person to function and continue to do better and recognize their worth, that's success for me. I don't look at grand success. I don't think social work, you can have that, so it's really hard to kind of quantify that. But just the overall morale, and I've been received very well in the buildings, received by the students, the staff. I have parents that I will pass in the hallways that are like, oh, I see you scurrying and running around, and I've never met them, but recognizing, you know, kind of what we're trying to do and create that impact in the community is success for me.
Thank you.
Are the children allowed to somehow just contact you directly without going to the guidance counselor or the building administrator? Is there some method to that?
So because my office is in the high school, occasionally I will. If I always leave my door open, they'll kind of pop in, or if their sibling is referred, but they haven't really identified as any sort of issue, occasionally they'll pop in. Typically not, because I'm all over the place. But once I identify a kid that I've worked with, typically like, can you come back and see me next week, or can you, come into the house and talk to my dad about, whatever it might be, that sort of holistic family approach. But again, to let them know that whatever need they have, we'll, try to figure out how to support that. And it's sort of like always an open door. If they can't find me, go to an administrator, go to a teacher, go to a counselor. Getting referrals and student is not a problem. Every day, all day, it's kind of a fluid, I'm getting referred for some reason, for something. From, again, an actively suicidal student to a kid that just seems sad,
Are they willing to come to you and say, gee, I think my friend is in trouble?
Some do.
Haven't gotten to that level yet?
Not quite yet. I did present at the middle school on Catch Me in the Middle Day, and you can tell that they're still a little bit uncomfortable talking about their feelings, especially at that level. I think lower level, the counselors have a bit more interaction, can kind of get down on their level and do more of the social emotional, which is why I started at the middle school to really kind of make that impact, and then spill up into the high school. But I had chocolates in my office, Play-Doh, cards, games, literally so they can just come in and talk. Usually music will be playing, especially the high schoolers, so they feel it's a safe environment, and they just don't stop talking. I also have a wall of positivity that I started at the beginning of the school year, and I was very frustrated because the kids weren't coming in, and now it's almost filled. Again, so they can have extra encouragement and motivation when they come into the office.
Do you get pushback from any of the parents?
All the time, absolutely. Yep.
Can you talk anecdotally about?
Yeah, the main stigma and pushback that I get is when I go to the home, these families have typically already been involved with children and youth social services, the school, disciplinary referrals, so they immediately think I'm coming to take their children, or I'm coming for a negative reason, which is why I always try to take something tangible to reduce that I'm not here to make your life more complicated. I'm here to help you improve, and whatever improvement for you. It's unrealistic for me to say for a family of 12 to totally revamp, restructure, where they're not transient and be perfect. So it's okay, your kids are missing every day. Can we get them to school 3 days a week? 3 to 5, 5 to full on attendance. But there's always kickback, just because I think that intrusive piece of it, and they don't want something negative to happen. Because I'm coming into the home. So.
Have you been refused outright?
Mhm. Yep. And I make sure I say, you absolutely have that right. If behaviors would persist or concerns, we're mandated reporters. We will continue to make those reports. Here's my contact information. Please feel free to call me for whatever you might need. And usually they take some time to think about it, and they'll, hey, do you remember? And then I have to go back. But yeah, there's some that just. And until they're ready to make change, they have to decide that they can make that commitment. But we'll try.
Other questions? I have just actually two quick things. I'd be interested in knowing a little bit about what a parent clinic is, how that went, and also if we had a magic wand, which we don't, but if we did, what could we do to make your job easier, more effective, fill in the blank.
Okay. Parent clinic, I'll start there. We did it basically like a mental health 101, and again, we opened it up to middle school, high school parents. We just did a quick on cyberbullying, depression, anxiety, understanding triggers, suicidal thoughts, how to speak to your children about that. Very simple, very just kind of skimming the surface, and then I had them complete, like your ticket out the door on some other topics of interest that they would be interested in learning about. We've also thought about doing a book club, identifying a book, and then having a collaborative discussion on some of those mental health sort of symptoms. So in planning in future, and I had a parent come up and volunteer some yoga time to do a mindfulness, stress, and relaxation. So we have lots of ideas. It's a matter of finding the time, which leads into my magic wand, which would be to replicate myself, so I could be everywhere. That's really, I'm very motivated, highly passionate about what I do. I just have to decide. I'm constantly assessing risk, where I can be and when I can be there. I don't have time to do all of the things that I would really love to do to really make that impact. So that would be my wish, that we could have more of me. So.
Well, we're really glad that we have you.
Yes, thank you.
And we really appreciate and value your sharing, because we've wondered, we've got this new position, this new person, and, we've wondered, how it was going and also we thank you for taking some time out on a day off in a, bitter cold evening to come and share, your experiences with us. Anything else for Ms. King?
If I'm,
Sure.
just one, when you have to refer a family or a student to outside services, do we have any kind of satisfaction survey, or would there be any kind of merit to that to get a handle on how services are being delivered and the effectiveness of those services by outside sources?
Yeah, typically they should have, most mental health agencies, like when they're being referred, they do their own sort of consumer satisfaction, because after it leaves my hands, like once the referral is done, the family does the intake, they're kind of under their sort of rules and protocols, and the therapist evaluating the clinician. If I'm referring them to a church or an agency for additional supports, like LIHEAP, for example, goes through the county assistance office. I can't really evaluate quality. My assumption is that the county assistance worker is doing what they need to do. I will, however, follow up the family. Did you get your benefits? Are you receiving your card? What is the access number? And if it's not happening, again, being that liaison to ensure the agency is doing what they're supposed to do. As far as me and like having a consumer satisfaction, like I don't have families that I work with really fill anything out. They're pretty good at telling me to my face whether they appreciate it or don't. So.
Yeah, I wasn't concerned about that part. I thought they would be pretty articulate. I mean, if we're sending a child out for therapeutic services to an outside agency, I mean, do they share that kind of information with you?
Sometimes there's a lot of, it gets really finicky with releases and age and what they will share and not share. If it's a family that I'm actively working with, like a family-based team, I'm typically on like the treatment plan, and I'll be invited to the inter-service planning meetings to sort of discuss kind of how the treatment's going. Our family or our school-based is a little bit different. They won't really release specific like diagnosis unless the parent will sign a release. And I may need that eval to get them insurance through the county assistance office. So there is a little bit of communication, or if a therapist isn't showing up to the school usually does a good job of calling PCBH or calling wherever and saying, hey, we haven't seen you, where are you? So we do a good job of sort of that checks and balances, but it's really up to the agency to kind of ensure that the service is being issued in a way. Now, if I refer and the kid makes no improvement, then we refer somewhere else. We would respectfully decline and try, or if he doesn't mess with the therapist, it can't get in soon enough, we'll refer to multiple places.
So there is some kind of evaluation process, even if it's not formal.
There can be, yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Again, we appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. If you ask that same question to the administrators, they would give you the same answer. We need to clone her. As you can see, Dr. Stoltz nodding her head. Absolutely. The superintendent's report tonight, we covered a couple of the items, the school board recognition and the so you want to be a school board member. Last meeting, I handed out to you a report on student achievement for PSSAs and Keystones. I'll be posting that electronically tomorrow, so that'll be available to the public. Of note in that report is that the high school level, the algebra, literature, and biology Keystone exams, York Suburban students scored in the top 5, 6, and 3% in the state, which is highly significant. Also highly significant is that in biology, and I think I misspoke last time, I think I told you biology, it's actually literature. In literature, there is not a single school district in the entire state that had a higher percentage of advanced students in literature on the Keystone exam. Not a single solitary school district that had a higher percentage of advanced students. Let that sink in for a minute.
Say it again.
Not a single solitary school district in Pennsylvania had a higher percentage of students scoring advanced on the Literature Keystone exam. Thank you, English department. Teresa and her colleagues have done a wonderful job. And the biology people are knocking it out of the park too, and so are the algebra people. So it's a really good place from which to graduate. And as Brian Ellis will tell you, it doesn't start at the high school. It starts much further down. So that report is online if you wish to look at it. It has some interesting comparisons in it, too lengthy to go into right now. The upcoming school calendar, the administrative team is working on the upcoming school calendar. We're taking a lot of things into consideration, including some religious holidays that we hadn't normally considered in the past. We're also, Act 80 days are now in the mix as potential, for potential use. I don't know that we're going to recommend them for use, but at least we're talking about it. We're also talking, one thing we heard from students, particularly at the high school level, is that this year their midterm exams happened after the winter holiday. They'd prefer it to happen prior to the winter holiday. If I was a student, that would be my preference as well, because then you could really enjoy your winter holiday. So we're looking to see if there is a way to accommodate that. We haven't ruled it out, but it is going to be a little tricky to accommodate that. We'd have to start school pretty early for that to happen. So one of the start dates we're considering is August 14th-ish, which is really early, or the week following that. But it won't be any later than that. The comprehensive planning process, last week, Dr. Krauser expertly led the first session of the Comprehensive Planning Committee, the steering committee, and working on the mission and vision statements. I've run many of these in the past, and Dr. Krauser made it look like he had done this before. So that was very, very good. Very, very pleased with how that came off. A couple of your colleagues were in attendance. Mr. Sears and Mrs. Schrader were participating in that process, and various stakeholders, including some great input from students. Every stakeholder contributed, and the way that Dr. Krauser set it up, everybody contributed in meaningful ways. So it was really well done. Facility study. Gilbert Architects will be presenting at the February 6th facilities meeting. They are finalizing the report now. They came in a process check with us recently, and at that time they also gave us a draft of a demographic study being done by professional demographers out of Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And when you compare their initial numbers with PDE's estimates and our internal estimates, PDE's estimates are way high. There's two tables in your superintendent's report. The first table are estimates that I did. The projections that we did internally are roughly off, depending on the year, anywhere from 19 to 90 students, which is really not that bad. The PDE projections are off, they're over by, I was under by 19, as much as 90. From 19 to 90, I was under, depending on the year. The PDE projections were over by 120 to several hundred. So we probably should rely on the professional demographers' numbers, is what I'm trying to say. And also attached to your report are the enrollment numbers, the current enrollment numbers. And that is at the end of your report. Any questions about anything in the superintendent's report?
I've asked before, but do you make any attempts when people come over to cyber or cyber schools to find out if they're new to our district, what was their status, before they lived here,
Well, we don't have any interaction with them if they're new to our district. If they're a cyber student from somewhere else, and Yeah, we sort of know then, but a lot of times what happens in those situations too, which we're mindful of, is if we have a cyber charter student who then moves to another school district, we've put in process steps to make sure that we're no longer paying that bill if they move into some other district. Because sometimes students will move, not tell anybody, continue to attend the cyber charter school, and the previous district is footing the bill, because they don't realize that somebody's paying the bill, and well, that's what the commercials say, right? So they don't think about notifying anybody about that. So we're vigilant about that. And we typically find those things out the easiest way is when somebody enrolls and we say, wait a minute, the cyber students live at that address. Now, it prompts a telephone call, and we find out, and then we go down that direction. When somebody leaves us to go somewhere, yeah, we try to have a conversation with them, but usually they're leaving because of some frustration they're experiencing that we can't adequately address in their minds. But we are going to make efforts to reach out to people who have been in cyber schools to pull them back, because as Ms. Mason's going to point out in her presentation, that's an area that we spend a lot of money on, and we need to try to recoup some of those costs.
Even if their total numbers were down a couple, because sometimes it's curious, kind of end of the year and moving around or whatever.
Yeah, it's not because of any concerted effort we've made at this point in time. Mm-hmm.
How do we actually validate that the cyber kids are quote-unquote attending cyber school?
We're responsible for attendance for those, and making sure that those kids attend, which seems kind of strange to me, but that's the way the law is structured. They have to rely on logging in information to cyber school. And
Any kind of independent audit, is there anybody at PDE level or anywhere that can validate that?
No, not that I'm aware of.
So we need a cyber truant officer or something like that?
We need more than that. This is a subject that really irritates me.
It's easy to fake, for one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of motivation for the cyber operators to be very liberal in their attendance policies, because that's what keeps the money coming in. I mean, I don't have to say that. That's the obvious piece.
Their bottom line is the money.
The performance of some of the kids that go through those programs, they are either not attending, they're being given credit for attending, and we're paying for it collectively, or they are attending and they're failing. Either way, it's a bad outcome.
Yep. No argument here.
Is there anything we can do to put some pressure on it? If we know the kids are not attending, can we withhold the money?
We can't withhold money, because then what PDE will do, what the state will do, is dock our subsidy.
But I'm saying, if we know, if there's documented evidence that they're not attending,
and then it's our fault.
These
Then
kids are actually attending.
but then it's our fault for them not attending.
If we don't know, how do we enforce? What's the information loop here?
We're responsible for their attendance.
Therefore, do we have a right to the information?
I would say yes.
How do we get it?
Contact with
Again,
the cyber
collectively,
school.
it's not specific
We don't
to
have
the
the ability to look at their system to determine who's attending and when they're
How do
attending.
we determine that we have a kid present in our building on any given day?
See
We
them.
go look.
Yeah.
What's the electronic way of go look?
We don't
If
have
we're responsible, then we need to be able to validate.
no argument there, but we don't have a mechanism by which to look at their attendance
Then
logs.
we can't be responsible. That's a
We're on the same side of the issue in this one, Joel.
It's something the superintendents can collectively take to
The only recourse we have is to go through the legislative process to try to affect change that way, which we're trying to do. That's our only real recourse, because unless the law governing them changes, nothing's going to change.
They won't change the law unless we, the citizens, put pressure on for that change.
Correct.
And there was such an attempt like a year or two ago to change the issue exactly on attendance and responsibility, but it
Didn't go anywhere.
didn't go anywhere.
So what is the process then? If I have a cyber school, I send York Suburban a bill?
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's just my word that 4 of your students are attending my school?
Well, we verify their address, because they have to submit their address. And so we verify that they actually do reside there. And so Nick will sometimes make those visits to make sure. Because we certainly don't want to pay the bill for somebody who actually doesn't live here. It's bad enough we have to pay for them if they live here.
Right.
It'd be really bad if we're paying for them and they don't live here.
But as far as, are they actually participating in this method of learning is anybody's guess.
Well, the cyber school would know.
But they don't have to share.
I'm talking about us.
No, we don't have,
It's
And
our,
they're audited by the state. So to the extent that they're cheating with respect to having students that are enrolled that are not actually attending, they, somewhat like we do, have to prove that for transportation for non-public kids, we have to prove that that student is on the bus, and that's why we're receiving a transportation subsidy, and make efforts to ensure they really are on the bus, as opposed to just on a list that we got from someone. But they're
Right.
subject to the same auditing provisions, I say the same, relative to the statutes that they are accountable to.
right,
And so that's one method, but other than legislative change, there's
understood.
not been a significant tightening of the grip.
Go ahead, Joel.
So I would suggest that if we don't demand the information on whether they're attending, we are
There's no real mechanism to demand it because they don't have to provide it.
they have to provide it, and it's because we are obligated to prove it. So I would say that if we are not getting that information, we've failed to do something they've told us to do. So we should force them to do it. Because we are at fault. We have an obligation, and we're going to throw up our hands and say we can't do it. Well, we better figure out how. And if we can't, we should take it to court.
Collective.
Because we're
Collective.
obligated. Districts are obligated to do it. And to have the only people with the information to say, no, we're not giving it to you.
Trust us.
No, we can't do that. We are failing our legal duty.
It's a much longer discussion to talk about the subsidy appeal process, but what your superintendent is saying is correct. The current method is that you refuse to pay a charter school because they're doing something you don't like, or they're not doing something that you want them to do. And because the appeal process with respect to subsidies requires contact of the state, they just simply go around you and get your monies directly from the state unless you file appeals relative to certain types of payments. So there are some discrete battles that are made between charter schools and districts with respect to, there's a lot of unique issues like special education subsidies and whether a student was a resident and who was responsible to pay for things, but they're all very discrete and they go through an appeal process, and sometimes districts engage in that process. But for many, many years, those agencies of the state were very much, I would say, in favor of charter schools, like the Charter Appeal Board. So there are mechanisms to do that. It's a tremendous administrative cost, and there are some districts that engage in that, and it's something to investigate if you feel passionately about it.
This is not an anti-charter school initiative. It's getting what you pay for. It's that simple.
Understood.
I don't walk in the grocery store and plunk the money down and hope I'm going to get a cart full of food.
but if they're not attending, we can't force them to leave the charter school. We can't deny
If they're
payment.
not attending, that means we're not getting what we pay for, therefore we shouldn't be paying for it.
I agree with you,
Continue.
but there's no mechanism to not pay for
And
it.
that's the whole point.
Right.
It should be an affirmative bill, not something that's an assumption-based bill.
We're all in agreement on that.
So we have several professional associations, including the Education Association itself at the state level, that can bring pressure to the state. We have direct input to the PSBA. We're members of that. We're members of PASBO. We have all these bodies that can bring weight to this issue. Is this a top agenda item? What's happening? Who's our legislative contact in the House and the Senate that can take these things and run with them. We're getting killed. We all know that. We're getting killed. Not
We
just
know that.
financially, we're getting killed academically by these schools who do not educate kids.
The education piece, I get, and I agree, but are we getting killed in terms of claiming that there's students attending and these students are not attending? We don't know that. Or do we?
We wouldn't
Some
know.
of us have direct information to that effect. It's not enough to say that it's a gigantic problem, but when you hear the cases, you know the cases, you have firsthand contact with people who are being, say, counseled to stay an active participant in a cyber school but not actually do the work. They're still on the rolls, but they're not doing the work. For all intents and purposes, they're just like an enrollee here who's a truant.
My recommendation
We're still paying for it.
is that you contact PSBA's newest hire in the legal department, Lee Dalton, who used to work for our firm. She's a former attendance guru, attorney, PhD, who understands all the nuances of the truancy law. I know PSBA lobbied with respect to changes to the truancy law on issues such as this. They were a part behind the scenes of the construction of the law, at least the input into the law. The results may not be something we all are happy with, but PSBA has had the issue of charter schools funding and attendance on their plate before. So that might be someone that would be a good contact for you, someone who certainly knows all aspects of this discussion, from why is the child not in the seat to why is the child not attending a cyber program and the legislative history behind that. So absolutely give her a call.
What's her name again?
Lee Dalton.
I didn't know that.
She's a suburban parent,
Mm-hmm.
has 2 children in elementary schools, is a parent volunteer.
Well, I'd like to bring this conversation back to the particular students that are York Suburban students who are going to cyber schools and the charter schools. Because I know this has been a long-standing conversation with the school board about whether there are additional communication strategies so that we're reaching out in a way where it's abundantly clear the success of pursuing a York Suburban education here, and that is a sort of a drumbeat that just keeps on going as effectively as that can. So I know that's a sort of a standing concern.
The report on student achievement is structured to address that very issue. And it's structured in a way it's never been structured before, from what I can tell. And to show that the quality of the education they get here, as opposed to the quality of the education they might get elsewhere, that's still considered a public school, is significantly different. So that report was generated with that very thing in mind.
Right. And what I'm referring to is efforts at personal reach out.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
This is part of that personal reach out.
Right.
It's one thing to go to somebody and say, you've got a better education here. Okay, sure. Here, you're going to get a better education here.
Yeah.
Look at this. Here, let me point this out to you. Let me show you this. Look how your school is performing compared to what they would be doing here. Without the data, it's a harder sell. The data is important to make that sell. It's sort of like Miranda going to a house with something tangible. It's the same concept.
Right.
So the data that I would like to see on each of these numbers of folks that are somewhere else, were they ever in the classroom here?
Okay.
Because part of the reason the kids go to charter here it's too stressful here. So, to say that I know that in certain cases I've heard of, that is the reason. They've been here. The kids aren't the top of the line, and they're not fitting in well, and they choose to go to a charter because their kids isn't made out in the suburban way. So, if we look at this and, 90% of them never set foot in the classroom here, then let's sell them on how good it is. If we find out 90% of them have been, we you've got a whole different problem. And I believe it's when you come in here with a focus on the rest of the kids, not just the top. And I think what you're gonna find, if you look at those numbers, a lot of them have been in the classroom. And so we need to keep going down.
Okay.
Exactly what we hear you look at as academy, why they as well. Talking right now, and every one of them would say graduation, because I didn't like what we're finding in this band, I didn't need the rah-rah-rah. I just want to study yet, and I just allow them to do other things, so yes. But I think this is just, might be interesting.
No, I think that would be very interesting.
Okay.
All right.
Did we have administrator
Yes.
report?
We'll have Dr. Stoltz go first? Okay.
All right, so first of all, I do want to thank Miranda, and I would love you to triplicate her, if that's the word.
That magic wand again, huh?
And I want to thank the school board. Thank you for all of your service. And then I'd like to introduce Kelly Duke. Kelly Duke is a second grade teacher at Yorkshire, and right now she's serving her administrative internship. She's a teacher and a student at York College, and is getting to do all the wonderful things that a principal is blessed to do. All right, so I was just here last month and told you a lot of what's happening in the building, so I thought for this report I would hone in on one particular population, and that's our English language learners at Yorkshire. So the picture, the larger picture shows our 35 ELs, English language learners, and it shows all of the different countries from which they come. Pretty amazing. What's most significant is this year we have 19 kindergarten ELs. So 19 students that qualify as English as a second language in comparison to 7, which is more typical of last year. So when we have our little ones that are coming in and English is not their first language, and we're doing our letters and our sounds and our beginning reading, it makes for an interesting, wonderful challenge. So you know that we have the Imagine Learning. I've talked about that before, and you saw our little boy last month that won his iPad because he racked up so much time on his Imagine Learning program. Another thing that we do to support our students, the picture at the top shows our little 2 little girls, and they have bilingual books. So we started purchasing bilingual books because those of you that have students in our building, you know that depending on the grade, either every day or every week, they come home with a book on their level that they can read. Well, the students with the bilingual books, every week they are going home with a paired book. So it's one in English and one in, right now there's only Spanish available, but we've gotten great feedback from the parents because then they can have the great bilingual conversations with their children, which we certainly support at home. And the bottom picture shows a mother and a daughter. They are preparing for the multicultural event at the middle school next month. Well, wait, it's in March. That's almost next month. So our ELs from across the district meet every other month in what they call Culture Club. So if before you attend the I Want to Be a School Board Member, tomorrow at Yorkshire from 6 to 7 is the Culture Club meeting, and it is where they are preparing for the multicultural event, which this year the focus or the theme has to do with games. So every month that they are together, they're focusing on a different country and a different country's games. And what's lovely about this is it's a parent, and it actually ends up being a lot of the whole family that comes as they are preparing, and they're getting to know each other, and it's really, I think, a beautiful example of embracing the differences that are going on in our building. So those are our beautiful wall of our EL students. but that number of 19 kindergartners and just the impact as that goes up through. I think the word is out that we provide a wonderful program to them, and I think that is why they're coming to us. Thank you.
Both, and Mr. Shirey, are you saying the secondary tonight?
Well, thank you for serving the district, especially since we only get one time a year to thank you for that. We'll take it now, and thank you for volunteering and also taking your evening and coming out on a 9-degree night to be here. So at the middle school, we have a lot of great things that are going on. It's been a couple weeks since we've been here, so some of these you may say, oh, it's a holiday. That was a long time. It really wasn't that long ago. It's just we're going so fast. I'll start at the top. Our co-curriculars, we had 2 amazing assemblies. We had our band and orchestra, and then we also had our choral concert. And the amount of parents and grandparents that attended, it was, I thought it was amazing. I thought we had a lot at the high school. I was shocked at how many come out at the middle level, even more. So that was fascinating. Other things, we got Ugly for Ugly Sweater Day down in the lower right-hand corner. Jamie's there with his, he's sitting there with the green and white and red. Top left, our opportunities to give back to our community. We had, as we always do, our annual food drive, and I know some of you participated in that. We raised over 5,000 items to give back to our local food bank, and we also participated in giving the turkeys and the meals shortly thereafter. On our opposite ends, top right and bottom left, we have some academic occurrences. Top right, we had a trial led by Mrs. Campbell against, it was Mr. McGregor versus Peter Rabbit, and the whole idea was they went through the process of what does the judicial system look like, what's expected, what's the process. We had a judge, we had attorneys, we had, there was the defendant, the plaintiff, it was everything all wrapped in one. And in this case, they did find one count, Peter Rabbit was guilty, and 2 other counts he was innocent after everything that went through. But it was fascinating to watch the 6th graders learn the whole process. And in the lower left-hand corner, just to highlight what Mr. Reed was able to do for us, he's one of our social science teachers, 8th grade. He reached out to, the woman is named Sue Akins. She is one of the stars of the show Life Below Zero. It's National Geographic. It's in its 11th season. I've never seen it. I apologize to her, but he reached out to her and said he watches the show, and let me paint you a real quick picture. Imagine Alaska. Imagine northeast Alaska. She lives in about a 500 square mile section. She's the only resident in the northernmost part, northeasternmost part of Alaska. 500 square miles, and it's just her. She runs a base camp that was an abandoned camp. I think it was for oil rigging. And hunters come in, and then she'll take them on excursions. And this is bear country, so they hunt bear and stuff. But anyway, she has a story, and Mr. Reed got to know from watching the show. She was abandoned as a child. Her parents brought her to Alaska, her mom did, and one day her mom went and never came back. And she was a 11, 12, and all by herself. And that was it. That was the last she saw of her mom, and had to create a life. There weren't services where she was in Alaska, and she had to basically live on her own. And through this process, she's still living on her own. She loves to be alone. And they made a whole TV show wrapped around her and a couple other people. She's been mauled by a grizzly bear. She broke a hip. She broke both legs. Big grizzly just bit right into her skull, and there's no one around her. It's 80 miles to the nearest road, and very very little communication, and when she does, it's usually she has to wait about 10 days for somebody to show up. So she was out in the open after a bear attack for 10 days by herself, just trying to figure it out. And her motto is just overcome, overcome, persevere, overcome. You have the power within you to do whatever you need to do to survive. And so anyway, he reached out to her and asked if she would Skype the class, his one class of needy students who he felt needed a strong message of grit and perseverance. And she said, I'll do one better, I'll come to your class. So she was, the government is taking her little camp and giving it to an industry who will now run it, and so she was in Washington, D.C. advocating for herself and the rights of any Alaskan. Because she's not native to Alaska, she can't own land in Alaska. She's a squatter. And so they're changing that law, so they're booting her out after living there, I think, 15 years in the same camp. So anyway, she says, hey, I'll be in Washington, D.C., that's only an hour and a half away, and I'm swinging up through New York to meet her long-distance boyfriend. Oh. Weird, but kind of cool. And she said, I'll be happy to drive to York. And so she drove to York with her boyfriend, and in her normal, Carhartt, overalls and T-shirt, and that's just who she is. And she spoke the way she would normally speak, and tried to be very careful with our students, and was fascinating. The kids were just She told her life story, and the kids just listened to every single word that came out of her mouth. So it was very powerful. But anyway, it was all from Mr. Reed, just reaching out, and we all benefited from, Dr. Krauser was in the room, we all benefited from that experience. It was amazing. So anyway.
Did you happen to tape it?
Yeah.
Dang.
No. I did ask if she does go on the road, if she doesn't like to be around people. She made that very clear. She was doing this to do something nice, but I said, I would love to have you come back and speak to the entire building, because she's not making this stuff up. It's amazing, because she goes, look, here's the scars, and it's just all scar tissue the whole way down from being mauled by different animals. Just amazing.
She did have some legal BBC bindings, so she wasn't allowed to. She works for the BBC, National Geographic, and we did inquire about taping, and there's some contractual items she's working through.
That makes sense.
She's technically an employee.
Yeah.
So just so I'm clear, the long-distance boyfriend relationship was the thing that triggered the weird comment?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm all for someone living on her own, and it just was amazing. She showed us videos of her, like, walking around camp, and, there's a bear, and there's bear tracks, and she knows they're coming, and they can break. That part, it was fascinating. It's different. Something I could never do. And we think this is cold. This is nothing. Yeah. She goes, it was like negative 120, and she goes, they don't even record it, because they don't have a scientific, in her way, they don't even have a scientific base station near me, so they don't ever, I can't prove it, because she goes, but I have a thermometer that says it, and I believe her.
So this is a heat wave.
It was amazing. Our kids are just, it was a wonderful, very cool. So, any questions about middle school?
Please let us know she's coming back.
Yeah.
Talk to the whole school.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Shirey. And that concludes our report.
Okay, moving on to the business office. Ms. Mason.
Okay. First item, the administration submits the proposed 2019-20 York County School of Technology budget for consideration and approval.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
I'd like to point out something in their budget format that I found very interesting, and that was the way they break out the functions. That's a fairly detailed budget, 40-odd pages long. But what's interesting about it is that they break their functions down from a single total into either an academic area or a specialty. So you get a pretty good idea what it takes to deliver a particular program, not just what it takes to do instructional service. So I think that might be called activity-based accounting or something like that. You guys know the terms I've done. But I found that very enlightening. kind of gave you a sense of how much of our money collectively goes to support each one of these academic areas.
Yeah. Good, I'll share that. Any other discussion regarding the School of Technology budget? If not, then
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Okay, next item, I'm going to group B and C together since they are both approvals of equipment purchases. First part is for a scoreboard for the high school, and the second one would be the John Deere tractor for the maintenance department.
So moved.
Second.
any discussion? Yes?
Question on item B, what is a full intelligent caption scoreboard?
Basically, the scoreboard, it's a scoreboard that it's digital.
What makes it intelligent?
It's the name of the scoreboard, that's all I can tell you.
Okay. And was this discussed in a committee meeting? I don't remember this thing.
The scoreboard is actually being purchased through the capital reserve funds. This goes back to last year's budget. This was part of last year's budget discussions for this year's budget.
I'm not saying it wasn't discussed, this just kind of came as a...
Yeah.
Would that have been at facilities, perhaps?
It was facilities, but I think we ran it through finance as well because that's where it was determined to move it from the operating budget to the capital reserve budget.
And actually, I believe the Booster Club is paying some of that.
They are going to pay the difference of what was initially budgeted.
At some stage, you'll let us know how much the Booster Club...
Yes.
Anything else on B and C? If not, then would you like to do the vote?
This will be a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, the administration recommends board approval of the IRS standard mileage reimbursement rate of 58 cents per mile for the 2019 calendar year.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, the administration recommends board approval to amend the 2018-19 budget to reflect the $25,000 received for the school safety and security grant.
Second.
That's great. We got a grant.
That's the $25,000 that every school in the state of Pennsylvania got, and then we are the other part of the grant is competitive.
So that's Pennsylvania money.
Correct.
No discussion.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. The administration recommends the board award the bid for the Eastwork roof replacement to Detweiler Roofing for a total cost of $1,195,000.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. The East York roof.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. I'm grouping G, H, and I together. They're all contracts. The first one is for the contract for assembly over at the high school. H is for contracts for engineers or architects to work on some details for specifications for us for bids. And then the last item is the approval of a special ed contract with Spring Grove. Do I have a motion?
Second.
Talk to me about the Spring Grove piece. How's that going to work?
We will be sending a student there, and we will be reimbursing Spring Grove for the educational costs.
Any discussion on any of those three items? G, H, or I? If not, then we'll move on for the vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. The administration recommends board approval of the additional bus van drivers for the 18-19 school year.
Discussion? Vote?
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. Okay. Next is a budget presentation.
Get a drink of water?
Yes. Okay, so you can go ahead, Wendy. Our enrollment, as you saw in the January 1 enrollment report, is 3,253 at all of our buildings. Our enrollment history over the past is shown here. These numbers are actually our end-of-the-year numbers, which is our average daily membership numbers, with the exception of the 18-19 number, because that is our actual enrollment number right now. But you can see our numbers have grown over the years, with the exception of the slight dip we had in 2016-17. But we've more than made up for that in what we went up in the 17-18. The ADM number, why I show it on this history report, is because that's what's used to give us all of our reimbursements. Whenever there's anything granted by the state that's done through a formula, or non-formula, they still refer to they use the average daily membership number. So when we look at the revenue, we'll look a little bit at the history, meaning 1 year comparison to the other, look at projected revenues, the revenue sources, and then also look at what's impacting the revenue right now for the 19-20 projected budget. So on the revenue history, you'll see years 2010-11 through 2017-18. Those are audited numbers. Our 18-19 budget number is just under $600,000 shy of the 2017-18 actual. And then our projected number currently is about $800,000 higher than our 18-19 budget number. And that number is without a tax increase. And as you will recall from last year, both the revenue number and the expense number will change from now until you actually adopt the budget, because we're constantly refining. Hopefully revenue continues to go up, but we'll see where that goes. So these numbers that I'm going over now, these are for the projected 19-20 budget. So for the local sources, which make up 81% of our actual budget, it's about $46.5 million, just under $46.6 million actually. The biggest piece is our real estate tax, which is $86.8 million. That number is about $40.5 million. Our next largest number then would be our earned income taxes, and that's from the county. And our interest income number, that while it's a very small percentage, that number has actually gone up considerably for the 19-20 budget projection. And then under the other local revenue, what's there is payment in lieu of taxes. We do have a steady contribution from the York College of $100,000. We get that per year. We get a annual PERTA, which is a tax payment as well, utilities that are in the district. That's about $47,000. And we do also get tuition from other LEAs. Most of that's mainstreaming, or like you approved tonight, our contract with Spring Grove. They would put something under there, just like we'll put our Red Line payment under there as well. So that is the local sources. on the state sources, that's, $10,272,000 of our projection for this year. Basic ed subsidy being the highest, that's at just under $2.5 million. And the special ed subsidy is at 1.2. Our retirement reimbursement is at 4.3. The retirement reimbursement is essentially half of what we expend in a year. And transportation subsidy would be the other one that we get a little over $500,000. And the last revenue source is our federal sources. We have 1%, but it's like 0.008 that we actually get federal dollars. Our highest one being the Title I, which is just under $380,000. The one that we thought was going to be going away, the Title IV, the Safe Schools and Communities, they are going to continue that. Right now, we're anticipating about $28,000 in that. We also have revenue sources that are other sources, and I typically wouldn't budget anything in there. But we know we will have something, generally we do have something in there, whether it's a bond issue, sale of fixed assets, or transfers from other funds. So that's why we don't budget there, because we just don't know what's going to happen. But until the audit, we usually end up having something recorded there. So when you look at both years, being the 18-19 current year and the 19-20 projected year, ironically, our percentages are exactly the same between federal, state, and local, as far as our state, local, and federal resources. So that's putting all the pies that you just saw into one big pie. Impacting the revenue in 1920 out of the local sources, and again, there is no, right at this point in time, there is no tax increase reflected. Our assessed value is up slightly from last year, about $5.5 million, which sounds like a lot, but when you break it down into the amount that you actually collect and compare it to the current millage, it's about $5,600 per mill collected. Our collection rate of taxes will remain the same at 96.5. That's what we have in for this current year. Our interest earnings I have in right now to be up $100,000. Right now we have 18-19 at 200, so I put in another 100 for next year. Going to continue to monitor that. I may be taking that up again as well. And our delinquent real estate taxes are up $50,000 from what the current year is. We have that at $525,000. And then our 1 mil collected at 96.5 current, or for the next year would be at $1,746,173, and that's with the current assessed value. Our last assessed value is dated October 31st. We should be getting one in February, so that'll be updated then. Impacting the revenue from the state sources, our basic ed subsidy and special ed subsidy, I'm holding them at the current year's rates based on the funding formula. We have been, I'm going to call it one of the top 10 winners the last 2 years because the formula has worked in our favor. With knowing that our enrollment numbers are continuing to go up and our other demographic numbers are changing, I fully anticipate that number to go up again. The governor's budget will be out the middle of February, so I fully anticipate changing our basic ed subsidy number and our special ed subsidy number.
Okay, just to be clear on that then, you've just carried forward the 18-19 numbers.
I did, yes. But again, they were based on the 18-19 funding formula. Because remember, they redo the formula every year, and they take it back to that base and then bring it back up. And the retirement reimbursement, that is up, an increase, of $170,000, and that's taking, the difference, between the current retirement rate, which is 33.43, against the new rate to come up with that increase.
But that's balanced by an equal increase in expense.
We'll get to that.
Whoops, don't get too far.
Nope, that's okay. This is the table that was released from PSERS after they had their December meeting and changed the rate for 1920 to 34.29 on their estimate last year. They were saying it was going to come in at 34.79. So these are their adjusted rates, if you will, that they're anticipating for the next 5 years. I fully anticipate that those will change next year as well. What is very nice about looking at these numbers, though, is the 35.19. That's the highest increase over the next 5 years, which is a 0.9. Prior to this, starting with around 2011-12 till 2017-18, I believe it was, we were seeing average increases of about 4.25% to 4.5%.
But it doesn't look like any of these would outrun the Act 1 increase.
Correct.
Okay, so that, if I read that right, that means nobody could file for exceptions on that, theoretically.
Theoretically. Okay, so now we'll move on to the expenditures. Same thing, we'll look at the history, the projected expenditures and what's impacting the expenditures. Like the revenue expenditure history is audited numbers through 17-18, 18-19 budget, and then 19-20 projection. And again, 19-20 projection is not a final number. It's just a snapshot as of Friday when I ran the reports to fill everything in. Quite honestly, some of the numbers have changed just in the last day. So we'll continue to work on that as well. The expenditure comparison, we look at two ways. First, we'll look at the major function, which is the instructional, which is the thousands, which you're used to looking to on the reports. The 2000s are the support services, which is pupil personnel, health services, admin services, transportation. It's all of the operating functions, if you will. The 3000s are the non-instructional, which is essentially our student activities and our athletics. And the other financing is the 5000 series, which for all intents and purposes is our debt service. So you can see the increase from 18-19 to 19-20 is about a 5.8% increase. It's about $3.3 million. If we look at what's impacting the expenditures from an object perspective, salaries is only up, salaries is only up $252,000 from 18-19 to 19-20, where our real big hit comes in is in our benefits. Social Security is 1.9, our retirement is at 8.7, and our medical and dental costs are up medical significantly. Do believe there is a reason for that, and at the Finance Committee meeting, we'll have more of the detail on that as Mr. Putt from AIA will be attending that meeting as well. Our professional services, which are the 300s, that is for the most part, that is our IU services. That's just under $3 million. Our property services, that has to do with our waste, our water, and our sewer, and our repairs and our maintenance. That's what falls in the 400. So you could consider that kind of like the operating function. Our 500, which is other services, our transportation is in there, which is at $1.9 million. with special ed transportation in there, that puts us over 2 million with both of them combined. Our charter schools is in there at just over 2 million, and our VOTEC is in there just under 1 million. Our supplies, that number is a little deceiving because that includes our natural gas and our electric. Some of our tech supplies are in there, and our books are in there as well. We've also had to do some reclassing on equipment at the states. May have changed anything that's under our capitalized fee, which is $1,500, has to now go into a supply. It cannot be in equipment. So that changes that a little bit too. So property and equipment now is anything that's purchased that's anything over $1,500 or over. So we do have capital equipment in there, and capital replacement equipment, that's for about $200,000. And then our tech replacement and equipment is just under $200,000 as well. And then our other objects, the 800s rather, that's our interest in our bonds, and it also does our dues and fees and memberships. And then the 900 is our debt service principal payments. Impacting the expenditures, again, we have our retirement rate contribution, which is an increase of $165,109. Again, it's the difference from the current contribution rate to the increased amount. We have health care in there. Our transportation is up. And our charter cyber schools, that is actually up almost $500,000 from what we've budgeted for 18-19. So we really do have to look at what we can do with those students, those costs, and then we'll be looking at the equipment also.
I'm sorry, did you say that's up $500,000?
Yes.
Thanks.
We also have personnel changes in this. We have 8 new positions. The autistic teacher and with the 2 paras will be grades 3-5. And we're adding an elementary teacher, half of a high school business, a human resource admin assistant, 2 ESL teachers. We're bringing the LIU contract in-house. We will no longer contract with EIU for the ESL classroom teachers. And the middle school dean of students as a 0.5. There's 4 retiree replacements that we have in, an elementary teacher, a phys ed teacher, a special ed teacher, and an art teacher. And then we also have 5 positions that are not in the budget: middle school math coach, middle school music, middle school dean of students, a 6th grade teacher, and a middle school science.
So you're not replacing all the retirements?
No, we are replacing the retirements.
Okay, tell me where we put the after 3. The high school social science teacher.
It's a transfer.
Moving up from the middle school.
When we do the revenue to expenditure comparison.
Can we go back to the 8 new positions?
Sure.
How many of those fall under, if I go back and look at support services, that is the biggest swing, about $3 million. In the expenditure comparison, 18-19 and 19-20. How many of those additional positions are falling under that, or are they all?
None of them are in the support. Oh, I take that back. The human resource admin assistant would be in support. The rest would be under the instructional.
Okay. Are you going to have a slide? I didn't see in here. Is there a slide detailing what is driving the increase in support services? I mean, you're showing that as the biggest increase in expenditures year over year.
That I don't have one in here tonight, but when we get to the finance meeting on the 13th,
Okay.
yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, this tonight was meant to be a broad.
That's fine.
While we're stopped, the ESL program being, done in-house, will we not be saving some money to do that? We currently do ESL services from the IU.
It'll be more of a wash because the money we spent on the contract was for less than 2
Okay.
ESL teachers. So for that same money, we can have more impact on kids.
Got it.
You see what
Yes.
see what I'm saying?
I just wondered about the financial piece. Obviously, we don't get those services free, so I wondered if that would
Right.
be true increase or only, they're not gonna, it's not as if we're adding 2 teachers there, because there'll be some that's...
Right, it's those 2 teachers
Adding a
replace
0.4.
1.7 contracted ESL.
Okay,
So we're getting more face time with kids
right.
for the same amount of money by having our own people.
Yeah, no, I'm sold on that, and my question was really the financial piece, like,
Talked about transferring teachers, is that the 5 positions not in the budget? Is that what,
Yes.
moving around, is that what that is?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so the revenue to expenditure comparison then, right now, we're short 3.4, almost 3.5 million. And again, these numbers will continue to change, and every time I report to you, whether it be verbally or on the budget, once we start giving the budget comparison at the meetings, that the number will always be visible to you. Okay. So the next tax increase chart, that's basically just to show you where we are at. Again, the taxable assessed value was the number I gave you earlier. And that number will change as we go along as well. And then to show you from a graphic standpoint, the 3.4 budget deficit, what would it take if you just taxed, what would it take? It would take 8.6% to essentially get that through taxes, which is just not possible. So if you look, the 2.3%, that is the base index. The 2.7, which is highlighted yellow, that's our adjusted index. The 3%, that is with all the districts in the county, that is the average index for this year. Mr. Sears had mentioned earlier about the retirement exception, about not being able to take that, and that is correct. I did look. Even if we would have gone for exceptions, we would have only qualified for the special ed. And if we did in fact do that, we would have fallen in at the 3.35. That would have taken our index up to 3.35. So funding the budget for 1920, expenditures that are under the administrative review are supplies, the charter cyber school tuition, our staffing, our contracted services, our utilities. And again, I hear what you're saying about the support services, but from an object level, that's where a lot of it falls into, is in that as well. Funding the budget for 1920, at this current time, administrative recommendations are to increase revenue up to the index. That would bring in just under 1.1 million. Use of assigned retirement fund balance, 300,000. This can then be spread out over 8.75 years. And use of unassigned fund balance, the 800,000 to cover the employer HSA contribution. And one of the reasons we were looking at that is because the way the contract's set up, you can look at that 800,000 as a one-time contribution, because this would be the second year of a 3-year contract. That gives us time to bring the money back from the trust and then reposition are the money that we have for claims reserves. Doing all of that, that still would leave just under a 1.3 gap. So options for consideration by the board would be use of assigned retirement fund balance. Again, take whether you look at administrative recommendation or decide that possibly it's better to break it out in another form. The current amount in there is $2,625,929, and all these numbers you have seen before. I will put them out again when we meet in finance in 2 weeks, so you have them in a table format. Unassigned fund balance is at $4.1 million. Assigned insurance claim reserve is just under $1.8 million. That's the money, if you'll recall, we had set aside on the assignment for, that's what we saved in the holiday from last year. And the use of the capital reserve fund, currently we have just under $1.8 million in that fund. So it's a combination or some variation of the things that I've just talked about for us to close the gap on this budget. The millage history is there for reference for everyone to see. That's something we just put in every year. We also do the county millage comparison every year, and there's actually no change in anybody's ranking for 18-19. The history is there for you to see as well. Next steps required of administration, as always, we'll look at to control spending. This will be for the remainder of 18-19 and continuing to refine what we have in for 19-20. Managing the personnel as far as resignations and retirements, looking at the needs of the district. Identifying the savings, as I talked about previously. And as we look at different things that come up with different things, bring them back to the board, either at the full board level or at the finance committee level. The board has February and March to consider all the admin recommendations and to make recommendations as well to closing the gap on the budget, with the intent, with the timeline to review the proposed final budget in April, so we can have the May adoption. Any other questions?
Questions for Clarine?
Dean of Students, middle school, now school moving by half.
Ines?
Is it going to be on with some other?
Yes. With a program similar to what happens at the high school for kids who are struggling academically. So it's an effort to, part of the time is that kind of work, and the other half of the time is Dean of Students kind of work. It's more of a preventive approach as opposed to a postmortem approach.
Proactive.
Not in this budget.
Anything else regarding budget? Okay, thanks very much.
Food service. Their dining report is there, and the sales report. Any questions on them? One item I would like to add is tomorrow and Wednesday, we are under administrative review from the department on our food service. It's essentially their audit, but they now call it administrative. So I will be able to report out on that probably at our next board meeting.
Department of Education?
It's the Department of Food and Nutrition, but it's a state department.
Okay.
That concludes my report.
While we're talking about food services, have we met the new food service director? I know Helen used to come from time to time. Have I?
That's a very good question. I don't think Chris has been here
Maybe
yet.
at some point. I mean, not next time necessarily, but just to put a face with a name for the board's benefit might be a good idea.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Geyer is not with us this evening. Hopefully she's somewhere warm. Oh, well, that's warm. Moving on with committee reports, I'd just like to remind board members of the February 6th facilities meeting. That's the discussion with Gilbert Architects. So if you're not on facilities and don't have plans to be here, please come if you can, because that's going to be, it's my understanding, a very informative, important meeting. So if you can come that afternoon, please do so. And then on the 13th, Personnel and Finance will be meeting. Those are the February committee meetings according to this schedule. So just so everybody has that on their calendars. Moving on, Mr. Scalette, Communications.
Yes, thank you. The activities and communication reports are provided. I have no additional report. Our first meeting will be in April. Thank you.
Mr. Robinson, Personnel.
Thank you. Please note the addendum at the end of the agenda, which I'm sure you all have. You have before you the personnel report, which includes employment, retirement, resignation, leave of absence, and volunteers. Would any board member like any of these items considered separately, or are there any questions on any of these items? If not, the chair moves approval of below-mentioned items.
Second.
Ms. Mason?
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
That concludes my report with one correction. I'd like to correct a grievous omission in answer to your earlier question about tomorrow's event.
Yes.
You asked who was responsible. I don't want to mention any names, but her initials are Wendy Irwin was really responsible.
Got it. Got it. Got it. We would be lost without Mrs. Irwin for sure.
To make that statement.
Okay, very good.
And could you say again where that meeting is?
What room are we in?
The staff development room, which is also known as 128.
128 in the high school. Hopefully there'll be some signage.
We will have that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, policy. Mr. Watts.
All right, thank you. Minutes of October 24th are provided. We recently met January 9th and had some great discussion on 8 policies you see listed there, and recommendation out of committee is that we make the board aware of first reading with these in hopes that they'll be on next month's agenda for approval. And each of those, the links there have red line changes, so you'll see the suggested language. That concludes my report.
Any questions for Mr. Watts or the policy committee regarding those changes?
The best way to communicate that is just give you an email with some things to take into account.
Sure.
Okay, anything from any other committee? The IU?
I have no report for the joint operating committee. I hope you all read it. Are doing fairly light. And I recently asked you to do more close communication with Sue Houston from the Downtown School Board, who represents both North Urban and Downtown School District on the LIU board, and I'll bring back to you information that may be of interest to you from those general board. I think most of you have gotten some information of the appointment of the new director out there who will begin
Right.
in the spring, and they have an interim director on board now for the next 2 or 3 years, so things are moving along out there. And York Adams Academy, we have 12 of our 12 seats are currently filled, which is always really good to see, and we actually had our first meeting of the year the last Tuesday night of this month, and that concludes my report.
Ms. Mason, York Adams Tax Bureau?
We have a meeting on January 28th.
Okay. And as far as the School of Technology, we did not have a meeting in December, so we'll have one next week, and I'll have information about that when we're next together. Any public comment? Last chance from the public for comment. No? Hearing none? Anything else for the good of the order? If not, then we'll stand adjourned. Thank you very much.